Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to explain the multipasses parameters that are part of the contour toolpath. Multipasses parameters create additional XY cuts for roughing and finishing the profile. When you define multiple cutting passes, the tool approaches the part geometry at the cutting depth in steps instead of cutting right to the part geometry. Mastercam calculates the passes from the finished part, leaves the finished pass for the last cut, and adds the roughing passes. It does not automatically divide the stock in equal roughing passes. That could lead to a big step on the first roughing pass. A special case occurs when the number of roughing passes is set to 1. In this case, the rough spacing value is ignored since the rough spacing is established by the finished pass spacing. It is recommended that you set the roughing spacing taking in consideration how much stock needs to be removed. A rough area sets the number and spacing, amount of stock to be removed of the roughing passes. Finish sets the number and the spacing of finish passes and the number of spring passes. Finish pass at all depths takes an XY finish pass at each depth, used for deep pockets to produce a straight finish wall. Finish passes at the final depth takes the XY finish pass only at the final Z cutting depth, so no tool marks remain on the wall. Finish pass defined by rough depth cuts performs finish passes based on the number of roughing depth cuts. Add between adds the specific number of finish passes between each depth cut. Per number of adds a finish pass at the specified interval of rough depth cuts. A multi-pass finish is always added to the last depth cut. Keep tool down does not allow the tool to retract between passes. Use it only if leading out motion is away from the part. Machine finish passes after roughing all contours performs finish passes after all rough cuts and depth cuts have been completed. Machine spring passes after finishing all contours performs spring passes after all finish cuts and depth cuts have been completed. Multipass order can be set by contour, which completes all multipasses in a chain before moving to the next chain, or by pass, which completes the multipasses by pass number and completes the first pass on all contours before performing the next set of passes. Rough pass cut direction can be set to one way. This one maintains one cut direction for the multi-pass cuts, or to zigzag, which alternates the multi-pass cut direction between climb and conventional. This is supported only by open chains. Back to Mastercam, I'm going to machine the open area, that it's a cut-through area, using contour toolpath, and I'm going to demonstrate the different multi-passes parameters. In the first operation, I'm using a 1/2 inch flat-end mill. I have no depth of cut selected. In the lead-in, lead-out, I just adjust the start and the end of the contour by extending both of them 65% of the tool diameter. No breakthrough amount, and in multi-passes I set up the rough number to 2 and the spacing to 1/4 inch. I also have one finish cut of 50 thou and one spring pass. I'm going to enable keep tool down for this operation, and I also have multipass order by contour. It doesn't really make any difference for this operation as we only have one contour selected. And for the rough pass cut direction, I have the one way selected. If I backplot the operation, You will see step by step. I am starting outside of the material that adjusts the start contour, and then I'm taking a first rough step, the second rough step, and then a finish step and a spring step at the final depth, both of them, as I actually do not have depth of cuts enabled. Okay, I'm just going to change the parameters, and in this case I'm going to use depth of cuts. I set the maximum rough step to 1/4 of inch, which is half of the tool diameter in our case, and no breakthrough still, and I'm just going to enable the multi-passes. Next, I want to check this in Verify. You can see how we have a big chunk of material left unmachined in the middle of the part. This could be quite dangerous. So as I said before, the system doesn't know how much stock do you have to remove. You need to figure out how many passes do you need and what should be the spacing. The dangerous is the very first pass could be too big, and also you leave some chunks of materials in the middle of the part. I changed the multi-passes to 3. I'm going to regenerate the toolpath, and I will be backplotting the toolpath first. We'll see extra passes, and then we'll verify it. Now we did remove the chunk of material that was left with the previous parameters settings. I'm going to change the parameters again, and I'm going to enable depth of cuts. Maximum rough step set to 1/4 of inch. And in the multi-passes, I just want to point out that I have before set up the rough pass cut direction to 1 way, which was maintaining the same cutting direction between passes. This time I'm going to change it to zigzag. Okay, and then I'm just regenerating the toolpath, and we can backplot first. You see it takes the first depth of cut and it goes in zigzag cutting motion. It's doing the finish and then takes another Z depth increment and machine everything like that. We can also verify. I'm just minimizing verify. With the second contour, I was machining the corners. I am going to demonstrate on this one. I have, as you could see, 2 rough passes, 1/4 of inch spacing. There was no finish pass selected for this one, but I'm going to enable 1 finish pass, 50 thou. And I want the finish pass to be performed after roughing all contours. The multi-pass order is set to by contour. With other words, it's going to finish completely one corner and then moves to the next one. And the rough pass cut direction is set up to 1 way. Okay, for now, I'm just going to regenerate and backplot the toolpath. In this case, we do have a lead-in set up to the arc only. As you could see, it's doing the roughing passes at each corner. And then it's coming back and does the finish pass for each of them. This was the result of having this machine finish passes after roughing all contours enabled, as you could see. I am going to set some depth of cuts, and again I'm just going to change this to 1/4 of inch. I wanted to demonstrate the finish passes at all depths and the final depth, the difference between them. And I will also demonstrate the difference between by contour and by pass. So I have the finish passes at all depths, and I also set up by pass instead of by contour, and regenerate. Starting with the first roughing pass, and it's doing the depth of cuts completed on each corner, and then it's taking another pass and completes the corner, and then it's doing the finish, and finish is being performed at each Z depth. A lot of jumping around. Let's make this a little bit more optimized. So instead of by pass, I'm going to use by contour, and I will have the finish pass just at the final depth. Okay, and regenerate. As you could see right now, it's going to complete the rough passes at the corner, and does the depth of cuts also, and then it's coming back and it does a finish for each contour. If you want the finish to be done in the same time with the roughing passes, with other words, finishing completely the corner before the tool retracts and moves to the next corner, you have to disable this machine finish passes after roughing all contours. Okay, regenerate, and now we can see again the toolpath. It's doing the 2 rough multi-passes, it's taking another Z depth increment, and is doing the finish at the final depth. And the spring pass too. Okay, for now. I am going to check both operations in Verify. Just let it run. And you can see the passes like that. In this example, I'm going to explain the finish pass defined by rough depth cuts, which performs finish passes based on the number of roughing depth cuts. In the first toolpath, I'm using a 3/8 flat end mill. I have set the depth of cuts to maximum rough step 1/2 inch. I have no finish cuts. In the lead in, lead out, I adjust the start and end of contour, extending it with 100% of the tool diameter. And in the multi-passes, I set up the rough number to 2 with a spacing of 3/16, and the number of finish spacing 30 thou. I also enable finish passes defined by the rough depth cuts, and I enable add between and set the number to 1. The add between adds the specified number of finish passes between each depth of cut. By setting it to 1, Mastercam will add between 2 consecutive depth of cuts an extra finish pass. Let's see this in backplot. With the current setting, we will see 3 depth of cuts. At each depth of cut, we'll have 2 roughing passes, and a finish will be added in between the top of the stock and the first depth of cut. Then another finish will be performed at the first depth of cut. Then again, the tool will take another Z depth increment and perform the first 2 roughing passes. Move up in between the 2 depth of cuts, will create a finish pass, and then goes back to the second depth of cut and makes the finish at that Z level. And we'll continue like this for the last depth of cut. Let's see it in back plot. I'm just going to see the first depth of cut, the 2 roughing passes, and then the tool will retract, and between the top of the stock and the depth of cut will make the finish. So you can see the finish is in between the top of the part and the first depth of cut. We'll create this extra finish step and then goes to the Z level where we have the first depth of cut and makes the finish there too. Takes another Z depth and will perform the 2 roughing passes, and then will retract and creates the finish pass in between the depth of cuts and makes the finish pass at the same Z level as the second depth of cut. And the last depth cut, doing the 2 roughing passes, retracting the tool in between the last depth of cut and this one, and creates an extra finish pass and finish the part at the bottom too. Okay, for now. So this setting was demonstrating the option of adding between 2 consecutive depth of cuts an extra finish pass. Useful when you are finishing deep pockets and you want to add extra depth of cuts. Next, we are going to see per number of how it works. I'm going to exit this toolpath, and in the second toolpath parameters, as you could see, I have per number of set to 2. This is actually the minimum number that I can choose. And in this case, the system adds a finish pass at the specified interval of roughing depth cuts and will also make a finish pass at the last depth of cut. So in our case, we'll see 1 finish pass after the 2 rough depth cuts. And then, because we have 3 depth of cuts in total, an extra finish pass will be done just at the bottom of the part. Okay, for now. And let's check this in backplot. First depth of cut, 2 rough passes. Then second depth of cut and 2 rough passes. And here we should see the finish added. Now you can see the finish pass. And then the last depth of cut, 2 rough passes, and because it is the last depth of cut, is going to also add the finish pass there too. Okay, for now. This concludes the video about multipasses parameters.